So in our last video, we figured out how we could define some variables, and we were also talking about the type of our variables. Now, in Swift, there's this really cool thing called type annotations, which allow us to explicitly define what type our variables should be. And we can actually go ahead and show you how to do that. We're just going to use the colon symbol, and then we're going to be able to type in int, which is integer for short. And here we're explicitly telling Swift that we want first integer to be an int. And it's automatically doing this right behind the scenes. So we'll get into a use case in just a second where we might actually define something ourselves. Often you're just going to want to let Swift figure this out itself. Swift is really good at figuring out, okay, what type should this be? But as we write code together in the future, you're going to see some cases where we explicitly define it. Maybe we just want to be very clear to ourselves that this is the type. It just might lead to a little bit easier code to read. Maybe we have a specific reason we want to convert a type, even though it could be an integer, and Swift would probably make it an integer. We want it to actually be able to interact with numbers with decimals in the future. So we can define our second integer as also an int here with our colon. But for our third integer here, let's actually change this and make this a float. Right? And this is completely legal. And we now see that over here on the right side, which actually prints out the value for us here, that we have our value here, which is negative 1,858,000, but it's added a 0.0 at the end. So because we changed this to a float, it's now converted this over to a number with a decimal. Right? And because of that, we could interact with this by multiplying this by other decimals, adding other numbers with decimals to this. We're going to see later when we start doing operations that we want to generally update or change two variables of the same type or have them interact in terms of performing operations on them with two variables of the same type. So changing this over to a float, or even changing this over to a double, right? Because doubles are much more common in Swift, right? Again, we're going to see this .0 here, or 0.0. We could also update var x here. We could say that this is going to be an integer as well. So we could do :int, and notice that it just leaves it as 5 here. And then for var discounted department store, we could do :double. Or if there was some specific reason we wanted to make this a float, maybe a parameter expects a float, it doesn't expect a double, we could define this explicitly as a float. There's also some C types if we're interacting with Objective-C. Maybe when we want to make this like a CG float. There's different types we'll see in the future. I don't want you to stress about those future types. I just want you to understand that when you see this colon and the type, we're using what's called type annotation, and we're just explicitly defining the type of the integer. So you just look at this and you'd say, oh, like int. Int is short for integer. First integer has to be an integer. And even though we named this variable third integer, the fact that we added :double actually means this is a double. So third double would be a much better name here. So just be careful with your name conventions. Now, of course, this doesn't matter. We're not coding out an actual project with this. I'm just using this as an example of how we can use type annotation to explicitly define the type of a variable.